Welcome back everyone. We're going to finally talk about a phone that I should have talked about probably a couple months ago, but nonetheless, we're finally getting to it, and that specific phone is the LG G3. Now, I personally feel like the LG G3 was a very interesting and really impactful phone when it first came out, and I even owned one for a little bit, but it ended up getting a problem. It was blacklisted, so I couldn't even use it. I just used it as like an iPod, and then I never even picked it up ever then. But here's the way I'll probably sum up this video so you don't have to waste 10 minutes of me kind of critiquing everything, is that I don't think the LG G3 is worth it anymore, that's for sure, just because of the amount of problems that this phone had at the time and how it is now. It's just really not worth it in my opinion. However, there's a lot of other LG phones out in the market that I think are much better and much better pickups than this thing. Phones like the LG G8, LG G7, those are tremendous phones in my opinion, and they offer a lot of value, and I've already done reviews on those. But other phones like the Google Pixel 2 XL and even the Google Pixel 2, if you want a phone that's not going to break the bank, those phones are really awesome values, and they are super cheap on Amazon right now. I think they're like less than 50% of what their value is, especially with the G7 and the Pixel 2 XL. I think those things are like $200 or $300, not even. So I'll leave all those links down below. If you want to get them from there, you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, looking on the front of the LG G3, this phone had a 5.5 inch HD IPS plus LCD panel. It was 1440p, and I don't think this was the first 1440p panel we saw on a phone, or maybe it was, but it was one of the first. This was back in 2014, and to give you some, perspective, the iPhone 6 came out in 2014, as well as the iPhone 6 Plus. I think the Samsung Galaxy S5 came out this year, which that one had a 1080p display, and the year after, that's when we got our first 1440p on a Samsung Galaxy S series device. So keep that in mind. This phone, I don't want to say this was like the greatest 1440p display phone in the world or anything, but at that time, that's some really impressive things to bring that type of value and to bring that type of screen technology in a phone that not a lot of phones really had at the time, which is really cool. Now, the panel itself really wasn't that bad, but you do also have very slim bezels around the phone too, which is really cool. Now, compared to today, this might be looking like a little bit more than usual, but this was back in 2014, and again, all those phones had home buttons, all those phones had fingerprint sensors and home buttons and all that. Well, LG G3 eventually put them on the back, but the buttons were on the back of this phone too, and I still think that was really a really cool thing. The fingerprint sensors were on the back, not on this phone, I didn't have one, but eventually with the G5 and those phones. But I can tell you, with the front of this phone, that's probably one of the most impactful things that this phone brought for sure. You had a micro USB port on this phone and a headphone jack, which is really cool. And on the back, that's where you had those buttons. And like I said before, dude, I think those buttons on the back were really cool. You had a single camera setup, which was actually better than a lot of other, manufacturers at the time. You also had a removable back, which is really cool. And you had a micro SD card slot and a removable battery, which those two things right there make this phone one of the better phones in my opinion, especially when you kind of look at the outdated and older phones. But there's just so many other problems that have came with this phone that I might as well talk about right now. Those boot looping issues. So if you guys don't know, I'm not even like an expert at it, but there were some specific issues that were had with this specific series of phones. I would say from the LG G3 all the way up to maybe even the G5 to G6. There were these hardware issues within the LG G series of phones, which made these phones kind of boot loop and you wouldn't be able to actually access the phone. Now, it's weird because I've heard some people being able to circumvent this with custom ROMs, but I don't even know how that makes any sense because it's a hardware issue. But basically, you would not be able to access the phones, you wouldn't be able to access any files unless they were stored on your micro SD card slot. So other than that, you're pretty much screwed, but that was one of the biggest issues, and I still think LG has a hard time selling their phones because of that stereotype, and I think they really need to start pushing the boundaries, or maybe even change their whole entire phone lineup in general and come up with a new branch of their name in order to kind of start selling more phones. I think they have the LG Velvet now or something, I don't even remember, but this definitely was a really weird thing, and it took a really good phone that could have lasted forever into a phone that, was very average for the most part. But really, that's the main issue at hand. So that really pretty much covers it up on the outside and some technicality problems. Hitting on the software, this thing was released with Android 4.4.2. We are able to upgrade it to Android 6.0 Marshmallow, and that's really pretty much it. It got Android 5, which is good. It stopped at Android Marshmallow. But the main thing is, and the hardest thing I want to kind of drill into you guys, that even though on stock software support, it's done, it's not getting any more software, there is a huge development community behind this specific phone. There's roots out for this thing, and this phone actually officially got supported with Lineage OS 7 17.1, which is crazy, and that's based on Android 10. So you have a ton of different capabilities when it comes down to custom ROMing this phone. And it's funny, every time I think I see a list of supported devices for custom ROMs, I think I always see the LG G3. It's always like obviously the Pixel series, and then I think it's always like the G4, G3 or something like that, and the G2 I think. So for sure, at the end of the day, this phone in stock is done. It's not getting any more updates. But in terms of the custom ROM capabilities, it definitely has a lot going for it for sure, which is a really, really cool thing. So thumbs up in my books for that. And I really, really do appreciate the custom ROM capabilities behind this phone for sure, even though it's kind of wacky in some other cases. So in terms of software, that really pretty much covers it. Now hitting on the performance, this thing came out with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset, a quad-core CPU, and Adreno 330 GPU, and there were two different models, a 16 gig model with 2 gigs of RAM, and a 32 gig model with 3 gigs of RAM. So in this case, I used that base model, but it really doesn't matter. What I will tell you though is that I think the performance of this phone is really, really average. It's definitely like nothing that you're going to, turn on this phone and be wowed at. And I think LG's UI was one of the bigger problems with it. At this time, it actually looked kind of good. I'm not going to lie. I kind of like that, kind of materialistic design. I don't know the best way to do it, but this was probably my favorite LG U design. And then they eventually switched to whatever they have now. And I don't even know what they're trying to do. But the performance wise, I think it's, I think it's okay for a 2014 phone. It's definitely nothing compared to something like the phones we have now or even budget phones of this day and age. But I think if you're trying to use a phone for a little bit longer, I think it's okay. And I think the way this phone looks is definitely deceiving, because the way this phone looks is how all phones kind of look now. Very slim bezels, a lot slimmer than this one. And so if you're using this phone out in the day-to-day, I don't really think a lot of people will freak out about it, but you're definitely going to be noticing some slowdowns here and there. So what I'll tell you is that performance-wise, it definitely would not be my first choice of picking a phone. It wouldn't be my even second or third or 100th choice. There's a lot of different things that come about when you're using a phone like this that aren't necessarily the best. And things like, heating issues. This phone heated up a lot, keeping apps in the background. Those are issues that you're going to constantly see. And if you're somebody who's busy, if you use a lot of phones or a lot of apps on your phone and stuff, you're going to start noticing these differences and a lot of these problems arising. So even though it's not like an end all be all, it's still a phone that performs. On stock software, it's not really that good, but on custom ROMs and everything, I think that's when you're going to start seeing a lot of differences. And I custom ROM my Galaxy S6 that came out I think a year after this, and that phone kind of breathed new life into it. It was a very stuttery, slow phone, but then once I custom ROMed it, it actually it was almost like a brand new phone almost. It was really, really awesome. So custom ROMing your LG G3 is something I would highly recommend to you guys. You don't have to do it, but again, it's something that would be really, really cool, and you can unlock so many more features when it comes down to it. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it. Now hitting on the camera, this thing has a 13 megapixel camera on the back. You can do 4K at 30, which is extremely awesome. You have OIS, which is really cool too. So if you're trying to take photos and videos and all that, the camera on this thing is a really nice camera at the end of the day. And I think that's something that if you're looking at this phone and you're looking at the camera, that's one of those things that was one of the biggest selling points for this specific phone. And I remember when this phone came out, a lot of people were making photo videos and photo comparisons and all that about it. And I'll tell you, man, the LG G3 still has a pretty decent camera on the back. On the front, a 2.1 megapixel camera, and that camera is not good at all, but that back camera really kind of makes up for it. So in terms of that, I give it a thumbs up for sure. Now ending it off with the battery, this thing has a 3000 milliamp hour battery, but it also is removable, so it's really not that bad. You had a wireless charging option, so I don't know if it came stock, but you were able to go and I think change the back and get that enabled. But with that removable battery, you actually go and get bigger removable batteries inside of it. So instead of having a 3000 milliamp hour battery, you can go and exchange that for like a 5000 milliamp hour battery. And granted, the back will probably stick out a little bit. You have to change up, wear specific cases for the phone and stuff, but you have that capability on this phone, which is extremely cool. And I think that's one of the smarter things LG ever did. With the G2 series, I think with some of the models, they were removable, but with some they weren't. On my specific model, the battery was not removable, but on the LG G3, it was removable, which is really cool for all the models. So to kind of sum up this video, man, to answer the question, should you pick up the LG G3 in 2020? I think obviously what I just said, no, you shouldn't pick it up. I don't think it's worth it like that. But for a side phone and for a phone to modify and, custom ROM and stuff, I think it's a tremendous phone for that. But to go and like for me to push, this phone out to a bunch of people and say, it's a good phone to use, you just have to custom ROM it. I don't even think that's a good thing to do, because if you're taking photos and if you have precious materials on this phone and it starts boot looping, you're going to run into so many problems that it's not even funny. So I think ultimately I probably wouldn't recommend it to people. But again, you could go and, purchase a Google Pixel 2 XL and a Google Pixel 2 or LG G7, G8, and those phones will do you so much better in the long run. So I'll link down below in the description. You can get them from there like I stated, but that's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys would check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.